The Natufian culture was a group of people that lived in this part of the world, today's Israel, Lebanon, Syria, the Levant, around 15,000 to 11,000 years ago. Now, these people were not agriculturalists, they were hunter-gatherers, but they were systematic collectors. They were hunting and gathering on a massive, diversified scale. And that diversification, the different kinds of foods that they were collecting in their natural environment, their beginnings of a systematic collection of grains and creation of compound little sickle tools to harvest grains, and systematic collection not only of large mammals, the gazelles and aurochsen and other kinds of large mammals that live in this area, but also small mammals and fish with dedicated fishing villages. That kind of diversification has been called the broad spectrum revolution. When we think about how agriculture emerged, that emergence was not initially because of the actions of a really smart inventor who figured out that if we plant seeds in a certain way, they will grow and we can harvest them and collect a share of them and keep some to plant the next year. No, this is a process that emerged over thousands of years as people began to use resources more systematically in particular places. Natufian people were among the first in the world to be sedentary hunter-gatherers. They lived in permanent or semi-permanent settlements. They built structures that were simple by the standards of later peoples in this area, but still had huts that were made of branches and leaves and with circles of stones forming their foundations. They buried people in contexts immediately in or around their villages. They were coming back to these places and using them for long periods of time. And they were investing resources, labor, work, social ties into these places. Because they were using these places so intensively, they began to use the resources around these places more intensively. They were increasing, if you like, the efficiency of extraction of foods and other resources from these places. They were trading over longer distances. They were developing denser, more stable populations. And we now recognize that all of those changes were really precursors to the invention of agriculture, where you're staying in a place long enough to store foods there, to replant seeds the next year, and to stay there or return there to harvest them in the following year. That kind of cycle of life really necessitates that you have already adapted to a more sedentary lifestyle. The Natufian people in this area were some of the first peoples anywhere in the world to make that transition. El Wad is the site of a Natufian village. And the people were using the cave, which is a very deep cave. It goes way back into the into the hillside. But they were living outside of the cave on terraces. And those terraces, they were investing work in. They began to build walls to retain the soils on the terraces. They began to build little structures on the terraces. They began to bury their dead on the terraces.
When we talk about the Natufian, what we're talking about is the shift from small groups of nomadic hunters and gatherers to fully sedentary occupation, right? One of the reasons we can say that is you've got these permanent installations. You don't invest that much time and effort if in 2 weeks you're going to be leaving again, right? You can see here this terrace wall, right? Also, investment in time and energy, permanency. The number of burials that we have here. Again, I mentioned that we have 115, 120 individuals now, minimum number of. And we have evidence from microfauna, for example, commensals, which we don't see in smaller, more nomadic-oriented sites.
Oh, so you've got like rats that are living.
Rats, house mouse, sparrow, right? Beautiful, and they're well documented. We've got one MA and a dissertation have come out of this from our department. So it's
they don't live away from human habitation
exactly
now.
Right. The humans create this magnificent habitation for these kinds of animals.
Yeah.
So, and you see them in other kinds of sites, but not in the kinds of densities that you see here.
Yeah. They're living out here.
Yeah.
They're using the cave for something, but they're living out here. They've got houses out here.
A bonus. You can live, be a Natufian without a cave. Because there are villages in and out and other places without a cave. A cave is nice.
Another thing that's changing in Natufian times is politics. If you're going to have large sedentary populations, you have to negotiate the use of space. You're going to encounter more different kinds of people doing more different kinds of things around you, and you're going to have ways of regulating those people so that the society's able to subsist. We see in Natufian times many pieces of evidence about the development of these political systems.
But we have a copy of one of the individuals that was found from here. That wasn't the exact spot. You notice that on the skull there's something stuck to. This is a dentalium shell headdress. Dentalium shells and other materials were used as decorative elements, jewelry. One thing that's very, very interesting is that there are individuals, male, female, sometimes youngsters even, that have this kind of decoration, others that do not. So we're thinking, your treatment in death somehow reflects your standing in life.
Right.
But we may be seeing also as a shift from kind of egalitarian hunter-gatherers to some kind of hierarchical social organization.
We make a big deal when we see, a little bit of ornamentation in Neanderthals. Here, it's systematic. I mean, this is helping to organize their society.
Right.
Yeah.
We're still trying to work out, just who may have gotten it, who may not have gotten it, and this kind of thing. And you find dentalium shells scattered out through the excavations also, just lonely pieces, whatever. And it's mostly in the early Natufian that we see this. Very, very little of this kind of decoration that you see in the late Natufian.
So did they just give it up, or just different social?
There seems to be the hypothesis right now is that for whatever reason, we're not sure why, there's a bit of a dispersal again. And a shift from a little bit more mobility. You lose some of the sedentism. Some people related this to the younger dryas, poor environmental conditions. That doesn't really fit now what we have from the dates, whatever. So it's a question that we're trying to deal with. What happened between following the early Natufian going into the late, but as we're getting into our late Natufian here, we're finding that it wasn't such a kind of flimsy sort of settlement either. So again, there are a number of questions that we're trying to deal with.
Sure, yeah. So the Natufian people really give us the best evidence we have about what lifestyles were like among the last sedentary hunter-gatherers in this part of the world. And archaeologists and anthropologists now understand that as we go to study how agriculture emerged, the social structures, the use of time and place, the yearly cycle, all of these things are things that hunter-gatherers were understanding for thousands of years before we begin to see the development of domestication of plants and animals that enabled agriculture to begin in earnest. Agriculture, as a change in the subsistence pattern, is fundamentally economic. It's about the relationship of humans to each other and to their environments. But the social changes that enabled it are changes that happened without domesticated plants and animals. They were changes that represent innovations in human social systems. Those social systems are what began to change not only here in the Near East, but elsewhere in the world as agriculture was emerging.